Okay, everyone, sorry the last video got cut off. We have a strict 15-minute limit here with Screencast-O-Matic. So again, what I was saying in lesson 1 is from the theory of holistic bilingualism, we need to think about how we have multiple language resources, and we need to be looking at students and considering what they can do in all of their languages. So again, with the color example, if one student can read or can have 4 colors in one language, but 6 colors or 5 colors even in across 2 languages, that maybe we should be valuing what they can do with both languages before we label one kid as a deficit just because they're not reading. I keep saying reading, but performing like with a colored list, like a monolingual English speaker would. So we're trying to honor what kids can do in 2 languages. So where I left off in the last video was turning to our reading analysis again. And if our goal is to be reading at grade level, reading at 34 by middle of the year, 3rd grade, and we look at some of our students that we saw in the reading analysis, what if we had a student who was reading at an 18 in Spanish and at a 16 in English? If we put those 2 together, just like we put the colors together, then what we have is a student who could read at a 34 if we put English and Spanish together, assuming that both of those things are happening inside the kid's brain, which we know they are. So if we value that number as much as we value a 34 in one language, then we might see these kids in a different light. So essentially it's kind of exciting to see what kids can do in 2 languages. Okay. Let's go back to our PowerPoint, and we are moving on to part 2, which is our writing analysis. If we look at our module for week 7 and 8, we are turning to writing. We're still thinking about norms, but we're going to talk about writing for ELLs. You're going to read about some instructional practices that are linguistically valid for ELLs. We are going to think critically about discourse patterns and how there are norms for writing, just like we see in reading. There's norms for reading, and there's also norms for writing. And then I'm going to walk you through a little bit of a writing analysis. So all of your resources here, the writing analysis documents, the norms for discourse, the qualitative writing rubric, and the reading are all here on Moodle. So go ahead and pause the video and look for those and then come back. So one option for your introspective this week is to write a paragraph from using a non-dominant discourse. So here's what this means. In U.S. schools, we like to follow what's called a linear discourse pattern, and that looks a little bit like, if I go to the next slide, it looks like this. There's a clear topic, everything goes in order, and then there's a conclusion sentence. So when I was a language arts teacher, we had to train students to write using an 11-sentence paragraph format. So that's topic, sentence, primary support, secondary support, and so on and so forth until we got to the conclusion. And if students could do this, then they would pass our state test. So what this format looks like is as follows. My favorite food. The most spectacular food in the universe is pizza. I like pizza because you can eat it any time of the day. It is excellent fresh out of... Sorry, that's a typo. It is excellent fresh out of the box, maybe what I was thinking. Sometimes, though, I love eating cold pizza for breakfast. Oh, fresh out of the oven. Another reason why pizza is my favorite food is because of all of the toppings. Sometimes I feel like eating something traditional like pepperoni. However, in other times I feel like a yummy Hawaiian-style pizza with pineapple and ham. Finally, I like pizza because it is accessible. Pizza can now be ordered online. I can pick it up at a variety of restaurants, or I can have it delivered to my door. In conclusion, these are the 3 reasons why pizza is my favorite food. So I want you to take a minute and just reflect on whether or not this pattern makes you feel comfortable. Is it similar to how you were trained to write? Is it similar how you're teaching other students to write? And just maybe you can have a dinner conversation with somebody tonight about the pros and cons with writing and teaching writing in this fashion. Once we identify that, let's problematize this a little bit. So I'm introducing you guys to norms and language production for speaking and writing. And again, norms are just these unwritten rules for how things work. So oftentimes, using standard American English, we write in that very linear pattern that you saw above or just a minute ago. But what we know, and this is kind of old, but it's still interesting to me and relevant to me, we can see how across different language groups or ethnic groups that we might not talk the way that we write in school. So what this sounds like is quote unquote, raise your hand if you have ever sat at a Thanksgiving dinner table and your family is yelling over one another, or whether or not there's 1,000 topics going on at once and it's 4 hours until you conclude any one of these given topics. So that's exactly what these patterns are showing us. Growing up in a Portuguese-Hawaiian family where Pidgin was the dominant discourse, I am very familiar with these regressions or digressions in how we talk. So that means we don't stay on topic, but we get sidetracked with some really, really important details. So go ahead and find what these digressions look like. Go ahead and find the sample called My Dog, and that would be in the where it says Writing Analysis Documents. Go ahead and open that up and you'll see this sample, and I want you to go ahead and read it. When you read it, I want you to pay attention to this section right here, where all of a sudden he's saying he has friends and they are called Ponto, Chispis, Marley, Oso, Princess, and Camila. He cost 300, I had 100, my sister had 50, and me, I had 400 at all. So that is a very important detail, and if you worked with kids or you come from a family with these digressive patterns, you know that that piece of information is so important to the kid that there is no way you're going to funnel it out of them, and they're not going to be able to just do a very linear essay without including that detail. So you're going to have issues with kids feeling stressed out or frustrated that you're, for lack of a better term, putting a square peg in a round hole. You're trying to get them to write in a very narrow fashion, and that can be really frustrating for kids. Okay, so here's one of the remedies that I'm going to offer to you. So in your on Moodle, you have this qualitative analysis of student writing, and I want you to open up those writing documents and look for a sample, a first grade writing sample and a fifth grade writing sample. And you're going to analyze either one of them, and we want to start thinking about the discourse, the sentences, the word level, the phonics, and what students can do as bilingual learners as opposed to what you can do developmentally at a given stage. So what this rubric trains you to do, and again, these are students who are originally Spanish speakers who are becoming English speakers, so we call them simultaneous bilingual learners in English and in Spanish. So we're just going to be working with this first column here, the Spanish to English, since we don't have their Spanish writing sample to analyze. And the first thing that you're going to do is I want you to look at the bottom of this table, and I want you to identify things in the sample that are characteristic of any learner, either at the first grade level, if that's the sample that you chose, or fifth grade learner, if that's the sample you chose. So for example, all first grade learners struggle with the word because. I've seen it written a million different ways. So just because a learner misspelled the word because that in the first grade, that doesn't signal to me that that child might be bilingual. That's pretty typical of a first grader to not know how to spell the word because. So anything in terms of structural elements, syntax, spelling, that is typical of a typical first first grader or fifth grader would go here in this box. So once you do that, then you can move up to the top part, and then I want you to think about bilingual writing behaviors. So these are an entirely new characteristic of or behaviors that you might see when you're looking at linguistically diverse learners. So for example, you might think about discourse in terms of transitions, first, next, then last. And does that coincide with the linear discourse pattern, or are we missing those and we're seeing a lot of digressions? Punctuation, you might have kids that signal awareness of a code switch. So, for example, I'm writing in English, but that word only happened in Spanish as carne asada. And I don't know how to say that in English. I'm just going to write in English, except for when I get to the word carne asada, I'm going to put it in quotes. So moving down to syntax. So you might see things like the bike of my sister, which in English we would say my sister's bike, but in Spanish we would say la bicicleta de mi hermana, the bike of my sister. So for that reason, even when they're writing in English, they borrow that syntax pattern in Spanish and they'll say the bike of my sister. So that would be characteristic of a bilingual behavior. Code switching, loan words like the word cubby, if they only use that in school, that even when they're writing in Spanish, they might still use the word cubby. Spelling. So if we look at spelling for developmental reason, you would see them spelling the word because wrong, like I told you before. But in fifth grade, they should be able to spell the word happy, unless they have influence of Spanish. Then they might be spelling happy with a J. So again, the top part of this rubric, I want you to analyze your writing sample from a developmental perspective and also from a bilingual perspective. Once you do that, I want you to think about 2 to 4 things that you would try to work on with this child. And then when you do that, I want you to turn to Moodle and go to Writing for ELLs, and you're going to read all the different ways that we can teach writing. So how are we going to teach these 2 to 4 teaching points that we just identified in our analysis? I want you to choose modeled writing and design a little mini lesson that you're going to deliver to us as best as you possibly can using the Flipgrid, so that you can get a practice of teaching in an interactive format. And the reason why, these are your writing samples, by the way. The reason why we do this is because we know that the discourse of schools have gotten increasingly complex. So this sample on the left is what my son, who is a native English speaker, did when he was in first grade. I regroup when the ones column has more than a ones. I don't know a lot of people my own age that talk that way typically. That is a very specific academic language discourse pattern that we use in math that we are now demanding first graders to be able to use. And if you compare it to this first grade writing sample, my toy is a cat, and my cat is beautiful, and the colors of my cat is black in my cat. That is very different than I regroup when the ones column has more than a ones. So we are expecting a very, very high level of discourse that is normed with standard American usage of standard American English. So if we expect that norm, that we have to be able to teach it. And when our students are bilingual, we have to be able to teach it in a way that is explicit and direct and interactive. So we can say things like, yep, that's how you do it in English, but here's how we do it in Spanish. Or, yep, that's how we do things in Spanish, but here's how we're going to do this in English. And you're never going to know what your kids are thinking until you write interactively with them. Another reason why I want you to read about how we teach writing to ELLs is because the sample on the right is the type of interventions that we are seeing in schools. I want you to go ahead and look at this and see what you think the learner did wrong here, and then go ahead and turn the video back on, and I'm going to fill you in. So we have words that use the U sound over here and words that don't. So gum, sun, dog or pup and bun, and this is jar, I think a chick and this is not a pig, that is mud, and this is ham. So in conclusion, this kind of instruction that's really autonomous is what we see for intervention for bilingual kids all the time. It's really confusing, and I want you to pay attention to the interactive writing strategies in the reading provided.